All right.
She kicked me out.
So today we are on chapter 18. Just to summarize, since it's been a couple days since we read, Colin has this tantrum. Actually, I think I forgot to post this video. Of chapter 17. He has a tantrum and he's like really upset and he's freaking out. And he's like, he wakes up in the middle of the night, he's screaming, crying, wakes up the whole house. And then Mary comes in and she is basically like, you're you're a spoiled brat, like you're wasting your life just being like sad, angry that you're gonna die, and you're not a hunchback, so stop talking about it. And she's like the first person who really like just tells him off, and he responds to that. So Mary's basically like, you gotta go outside, you gotta like live your life, you gotta get out of this bed, and Colin agrees to it. So chapter 18, I wish I could show you how all this is written, like doing their accents is really crazy. Chapter 18 is titled "Thou Munnot Waste No Time," which I think means you must not waste any time. Alright. Of course, Mary did not waken early the next morning. She slept late because she was tired, and when Martha brought her breakfast, she was told that though Colin was quite quiet, he was ill and feverish, as he always was after he had worn himself out with a fit of crying. Mary ate her breakfast slowly as she listened. He says he wishes you would please go and see him as soon as you can, Martha said. It's strange what a fancy he's took to you. You did give it to him last night for sure, didn't you? Nobody else would have dared to do it. Poor lad. He's been spoiled till salt won't save him. Mother says that the two worst things that can happen to a child is never to have his own way or always to have it. She doesn't know which is the worst. You were in a fine temper yourself, too. But when he says to me, when I went into his room, please ask Miss Mary if she'll please come and talk to me. Think of him saying, please. Will you go, miss? I'll run and see Dickon first, said Mary. No, I'll go see Colin first and tell him. I know what I'll tell him, with a sudden inspiration. She had her hat on when she appeared in Colin's room for a second, and for a second he looked disappointed. He was in bed and his face was pitifully white, and there were dark circles around his eyes. I'm so glad you came, he said. My head aches and I ache all over because I'm so tired. Are you going somewhere? Mary went and leaned against his bed. I won't be long, she said. I'm going to Dickon, but I'll come back. Colin, it's something about the secret garden. His whole face brightened and a little color came into it. Oh, is it? He cried out. I dreamed about it all night. I heard you say something about gray changing into green, and I dreamed I was standing in a place all filled with trembling little green leaves, and there were birds on nests everywhere, and they looked so soft and still. I'll lie and think about it until you come back. In 5 minutes, Mary was with Dickon in the garden. The fox and the crow were with him again, and this time he had brought 2 tame squirrels. I came over on a pony this morning, he said. He is a little good chap, Jump is. His name is Jump. The pony's name is Jump. I brought these 2 in my pockets. This here one, he's called Nut, and this here one, he's called Shell. Those are the 2 squirrels. When he said Nut, one squirrel leapt to his right shoulder, and when he said Shell, the other one leapt to his right or to his left shoulder. When they sat on the grass with when they sat down on the grass with Captain curled at their feet, Soot solemnly listening on a tree, and Nut and Shell nosing about close to them. It seemed to Mary that it would be scarcely bearable to leave when she began to tell her story. Somehow the look in Dickon's funny face gradually changed her mind. She could see he felt sorrier for Colin than she did. He looked up at the sky and all about. Just listen to them birds. The world seems full of 'em, all whistling and piping, he said, farting about and hearkening to 'em, calling to each other. Come springtime, seems as if all the world's calling. The leaves unfurl and you can see 'em. So you can see 'em. And my word, the nice smell there is about, sniffing with his happy turned-up nose. And that poor lad lying shut up and seeing so little that he gets to thinking of things that sets him screaming. My, we must get him out of there. We must get him watching and listening and sniffing up the air and get him just soaked through with sunshine. And we must not lose no time about it. When he was very much interested, he often spoke quite broad Yorkshire, though at other times he tried to modify his dialect so that Mary could better understand. But she loved his broad Yorkshire, his accent, and had in fact been trying to learn to speak it herself. So she spoke a little now. Aye, that we must, she said, which meant, yes, indeed, we must. Aye, that we mun. I'll tell thee what us'll do first, she proceeded, and Dickon grinned, because when the little wench tried to twist her tongue into speaking Yorkshire, it amused him very much. He's took a grandly fancy to thee. He wants to see thee, and he wants to see Soot and Captain. When I go back to the house, I'll talk to him, and ask him if thou cannot come and see him tomorrow morning, and bring the creatures with thee, and then, in a bit, if more leaves out, and happen a bud or two, we'll get him to come out, and thou shalt push him in the chair, and we'll bring him here and show him everything. When she stopped, she was quite proud of herself. She had made such a long speech in Yorkshire before. She had never made such a long speech in Yorkshire before, and had remembered very well. The mun talk in a bit of Yorkshire like that to Mr. Colin. You must do that to Mr. Colin. Dickon juggled his book. Thou'll make him laugh, and now there's not as good for ill folk as laughing is. Mother says she believes as half an hour's good laugh every morning 'ud cure a chap as was making ready for typhus fever. I'm going to talk Yorkshire to him this very day, said Mary, chuckling herself. The garden had reached the time when every day and every night it seemed as if magicians were passing through it, drawing loveliness out of the earth and the boughs with wands. It was hard to go away and leave it all, particularly as Nut had actually crept under her dress, and Shell had scrambled down the trunk of the apple tree they sat under, and stayed there looking at her with inquiring eyes. But she went back to the house, and when she sat down close to Colin's bed, he began to sniff, as Dickon did, though not in such an experienced way. You smell like flowers and fresh things, he cried out joyously. What is it you smell of? What is it you smell of? It's cool and warm and sweet all at the same time. It's the wind from the moor, said Mary. It comes from sitting on the grass under a tree with Dickon, and with Captain and Soot and Nut and Shell. It's the spring times and out of doors and the sunshine as smells so grandly. She said it in as broadly as she could, and you do not know how broadly Yorkshire sounds until you have heard someone speak it. Colin began to laugh. What are you doing? He asked. I never heard you talk like that before. How funny it sounds. I'm giving thee a bit of the Yorkshire, answered Mary triumphantly. I canna talk as grainly as Dickon and Martha can, but thou sees that I can shape a bit. Doesn't thee understand a bit of Yorkshire when thou hears it? And thou Yorkshire lad thyself, bred and born. I wonder thou'rt not ashamed of thy face. And then she began to laugh too, and they both laughed until they could not stop themselves, and they laughed until the room echoed, and Mrs. Medlock, opening the door to come in, drew back into the corridor and stood listening amazed. Well, upon my word, she said, speaking rather broad Yorkshire herself, because there was no one there to hear her. She was so astonished. Whoever heard the like? Whoever on earth would have heard that? Would have thought that? There was so much to talk about. It seemed as if Colin could never hear enough of Dickon and Captain and Soot and Nut and Shell and the pony whose name was Jump. Mary had run around into the wood with Dickon to see Jump. He was a tiny, shaggy little moor pony with thick locks hanging over his eyes and a pretty face with a nuzzling velvet nose. He was rather thin, with living on moor grass, but he was as tough and wiry as if the muscles in his little legs had been made from steel springs. He had lifted his head and whinnied softly the moment he saw Dickon, and he had trotted up to him and put his head across his shoulders. Then Dickon had talked into his ear, and Jump had talked back a little in odd whinnies and puffs and snorts. Dickon had made him give Mary his small front hoof and kiss her on the cheek with his velvet muzzle. "Does he really understand everything Dickon says?" Colin asked. "It seemed as if he does," answered Mary. "Dickon says anything will understand if you're friends with it for sure, but you have to be friends for sure." Colin lay quiet a little while, with his strange gray eyes seeming to be staring at the wall, but Mary saw that he was thinking. "I wish I was friends with things," he said at last, "but I'm not. I never had anything to be friends with, and I can't bear people." "Can't you bear me?" asked Mary. "Yes, I can," he answered, "but it's funny that I even like you." Ben Weatherstaff. "It's funny, but I even like you." "Ben Weatherstaff said I was like him," said Mary. "He said he'd warrant we'd both got the same nasty tempers. I think you are like him too. We are all three alike, you and I and Ben Weatherstaff. He said we were neither much of us. He said we were neither of us much to look at, and we were as sour as we looked. But I don't feel as sour as I used to before I knew the Robin and Dickon." "Did you feel as if you hated people?" "Yes," answered Mary without any affectation. "I should have detested you if I had seen you before I saw the Robin and Dickon." Colin put out his thin hand and touched her. "Mary," he said, "I wish I hadn't said what I did about sending Dickon away. I hated you when you said he wasn't like an angel, and I laughed at you, but perhaps he is." "Well, it was rather funny to say it," she admitted frankly, "because his nose does turn up, and he has a big mouth, and his clothes have patches all over them, and he talks broad Yorkshire, but if an angel did come to Yorkshire and live on the moor, if there was a Yorkshire angel, I believe he'd understand the green things, and know how to make them grow, and he would know how to talk to the wild creatures as Dickon does, and they'd know he was friends for sure." "I don't mind Dickon looking at me," said Colin. "I want to see him." "I'm glad you said that," answered Mary, because quite suddenly it came to her mind that this was the minute to tell him. Colin knew something new was coming. "Because what?" he cried eagerly. Mary was so anxious that she got up from her stool and came to him and caught both of his hands. "Can I trust you? I've trusted Dickon because birds trusted him. Can I trust you for sure? For sure?" she implored. Her face was so solemn that he almost whispered his answer. "Yes, yes." "Well, Dickon will come to see you tomorrow morning, and he'll bring his creatures with him." "Oh!" Colin cried out in delight. "But that's not all," Mary went on, almost pale with solemn excitement. "The rest is better. There is a door into the garden. I found it. It is under the ivy of the wall." If he had been a strong, healthy boy, Colin would have probably shouted, "Hooray!" But he was weak and rather hysterical. His eyes grew bigger and bigger, and he gasped for breath. "Oh, Mary," he cried out with half a sob. "Shall I see it? Shall I get into it? Shall I live to get into it?" And he clutched her hands and dragged her towards him. "Of course you'll see it," snapped Mary indignantly. "Of course you'll live to get into it. Don't be silly." She was so unhysterical and natural and childish that she brought him to his senses, and he began to laugh at himself, and a few minutes afterward he was sitting on her stool again, telling him not what she imagined the secret garden to be like, but what it really was. And Colin's aches and tiredness were forgotten, and he was listening enraptured. "It is just what you thought it would be," he said at last. "It sounds just as if you had really seen it. You know I said that when you told me first." Yeah. Mary hesitated about 2 minutes, then boldly spoke the truth. "I had seen it, and I had been in it," she said. "I found the key and got in weeks ago, but I daren't tell you. I daren't because I was so afraid I couldn't trust you for sure." And that is the end of chapter 18. We'll read 19 tomorrow. Where's my mouse?